Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. We begin with India and China. After years of standoff and military tension and a recent border deal, is a complete reset on the cards. India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval is in Beijing. He met China's top diplomat Wang Yi today. We'll tell you what came out of the meeting. On the other corner of the world, Donald Trump has trained his guns on India. He says India imposes a lot of tariffs, so he will do the same. We will discuss the implications. After the setback in Syria, is Russia shifting its military assets to Libya? We'll show you satellite images and tell you why Libya of all places. The ugly side of Wall Street, where wealth and success comes with overwork fueled by prescription drugs. We'll also talk about why India is reopening its embassy in North Korea, why DR Congo has sued tech giant Apple, how Bangladesh is letting off separatists wanted by India, how the US has banned junk fees or hidden fees in ticket and hotel bills, and why others should follow suit. And why two NASA astronauts remain stranded in space. Their return has hit a new delay. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. In India, a ferry boat in Mumbai capsizes after being hit by a speedboat. At least 13 passengers have been killed in the accident. More than 100 others have been rescued. The boat was going from the Gateway of India to the Elephanta Caves. A massive search and rescue operation has been launched to find the missing. Russia detains a suspect in the killing of its general, Igor Kirillov. An Uzbek citizen has been arrested for the attack claimed by Ukraine. The general is the senior-most military official to be assassinated in Russia since the Ukraine war began in 2022. South Korea's president fails to appear before the country's corruption watchdog. Yoon Suk-yeol was summoned for questioning for imposing martial law in the country. Last Saturday, he was impeached by parliament. The anti-corruption body is now mulling on issuing an arrest warrant for the president. South Africa holds talks with neighboring Mozambique. This comes amid fears of an escalation in violence over Mozambique's disputed election results. The opposition has rejected the polls held in October and threatened to plunge the country into chaos if the results are upheld. Japanese auto giants Honda and Nissan are reportedly holding merger talks. The aim is to help them compete against Tesla and Chinese electric vehicle makers. After Toyota, Honda and Nissan are Japan's biggest automakers. In 2023, China overtook Japan as the world's biggest vehicle exporter. And D. Gukesh gives his first reaction on winning the World Chess Championship, talks about his record-breaking achievement rather. It's a Firstpost exclusive.
Very young Gukesh answering a question saying your biggest dream is to become the youngest world chess champion. Was this something that you manifested? Or?
Once Magnus won the title, I thought it would be cool to bring back the title to India.
Between India and China lie the Himalayas, tall, imposing and formidable. For centuries, the mountains kept India and China apart. Now, technology has bridged that gap to some extent, but a trust deficit still exists. And it won't be easy to reduce that. Just ask Wang Yi and Ajit Doval. Both men held a very important discussion in Beijing today. Wang Yi, as you would know, is China's foreign minister. Ajit Doval is India's national security advisor. They are special representatives of their respective governments. Their job is to resolve the disputed border, or at least try to resolve it. This forum was created back in 2003. It has met 22 times in all these years. But the last meeting was almost 5 years back in 2019. We all know what happened next. In 2020, Chinese troops attacked India in Galwan Valley, so the special representative talks were frozen. But now there's a deal at the border. It was struck in October on the eve of the BRICS summit. Since then, both sides have disengaged, basically pulled back from the forward positions. Which brings us to today's meeting. Doval and Wang had two objectives. One, to take stock of the progress at the border, and two, to discuss the next steps. The meeting has already ended in Beijing. We have statements from China and India. They have agreed on a 6-point consensus. One, to maintain peace and tranquility at the border. Two, to work on a fair and mutually acceptable boundary deal. They're not just talking about Galwan, they're talking about the entire border. Three, to improve confidence-building measures, basically to avoid any mishaps. Four, and this is quite important, to resume Indian pilgrimage to Tibet and restart trade via the Sikkim border. This means that the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra could resume. Number 5, to strengthen the Special Representative Forum. And 6, to hold another round of talks next year, this time in New Delhi. Now, Wang appears to be thrilled about the meeting. He called it hard-won and worth cherishing. Doval talked about the consensus struck by Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping. He also said that India and China share many common interests and concerns. Now, the big takeaway here is clear: the pilgrimage and the trade promises. The Kailash Mansarovar Yatra is very important for Hindus. Mount Kailash is believed to be the abode of Lord Shiva. Lake Mansarovar is believed to have been created by Lord Brahma. Both sites are located in the Tibet region. But this pilgrimage has not happened since 2020, since the pandemic and the Galwan standoff. So restarting it is a big deal, sort of like a goodwill measure. The rest of the agreement is along expected lines: more confidence building, more rounds of talks, focus on peace and tranquility. The question is, what happens next? What happens after this? China is keen to get things back on track. They have a long list of demands from India, like restarting direct flights to Beijing, easing visa rules for Chinese citizens, and reducing curbs on Chinese investments. Those things were not mentioned in either statement. India's biggest priority has been the border. Disengagement has already happened. The next step is de-escalation and demilitarization. Remember, both sides have more than 60,000 soldiers in Ladakh. The goal is to pull them back, to return to a normal military posture. Again, this has not been mentioned in either statement, but they do mention India's long-standing position. Let me quote from what it said. Both sides emphasized on the need to ensure peaceful conditions on the ground so that the issues on the border do not hold back the normal development of bilateral relations. In other words, stable border, stable ties, which is a minor setback to China because they're clearly in a hurry to fix this relationship. Their economy has stalled since the pandemic, plus a trade war is looming with the United States, so Xi Jinping would love to normalize ties with India. But New Delhi is in no such rush. The Indian economy is better placed than China. The only concern at the moment is Donald Trump. Our next story tells you why.
India, which is a very big abuser. We tax them, and they tax us. Almost in all cases, they're taxing us, and we haven't been taxing them. Tariffs will make our country rich. Properly used.
So India and China are looking to normalize ties, and trade is a major focus area. The reason? Donald Trump. He will take charge as the US president next month, but he's already at work threatening tariffs left, right and center, targeting China, Mexico and Canada. And now Donald Trump has turned his attention to India, promising tariffs on Indian products. He's calling them reciprocal tariffs.
India, we don't have to talk about own. If India charges us 100%, do we charge them nothing for the same? You know, they send in a bicycle and we send them a bicycle. They charge us 100 and 200. India charges a lot. If they want to charge us, that's fine, but we're going to charge them the same thing.
Now, these threats are not new. Trump made them throughout his election campaign, and now he's proving that it wasn't just rhetoric. He plans to walk the talk, starting with Mexico and Canada. He will slap import tariffs on goods from these two countries, Mexico and Canada, and for China, he plans to raise the existing tariffs. The impact of his announcements is already being felt. In Canada, Justin Trudeau's government is under immense pressure. The finance minister has quit. There are growing calls for Trudeau's resignation, and Trump continues to mock him, calling the Prime Minister the governor of Canada. And now he's training his guns on India. Of course, India is not Canada. It's a bigger economy, but it's not immune to Trump's protectionism. He wants to use tariffs as leverage to secure better terms during negotiations. So the question is, what does he want in return? Where would Trump apply this pressure? His team is still working out the details, like which goods will face higher tariffs. Will Trump impose blanket tariffs, or will he be selective? It's not clear yet. Remember, last month, Trump targeted BRICS as well. BRICS is a grouping of emerging nations. It has Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS. The group expanded this year. It added new members like Iran, the UAE, Ethiopia, and Egypt. And trade is a major focus area for BRICS nations. They're exploring alternative currencies. They want options other than the US dollar to buy and sell goods. It's called de-dollarization. That's what they're exploring. Donald Trump does not like the idea, so he has threatened BRICS nations. Trump is demanding, and I'm quoting, a commitment from BRICS. Accept the US dollar or face 100% tariffs. That's what he said. India made note of that statement. Here's what External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said.
I'm not exactly sure what was the trigger for it, but we've always said that, look, India has never been for de-dollarization. Right now, there is no proposal to have a BRICS currency.
Now, this was a significant message from Jaishankar. BRICS remains an important platform for India, but New Delhi has shown that it is prepared to be flexible. During his first term as president, India walked a fine line in its dealings with Donald Trump. And now that he's back, India plans to do the same. Last month, India's finance minister echoed this same flexibility. Nirmala Sitharaman addressed the trade issue. She said that India is open to reducing duties. It would consider cutting taxes on some imports as long as they do not hurt domestic manufacturing. But what if that does not pacify Trump? India has other options then, including retaliation, and this is something that we've done before, retaliate. In 2019, when Trump was in office, he revoked some trade privileges. India was part of a special scheme. It allowed duty-free exports to the US. Now, this scheme covered exports of up to $5.6 billion, and Indian exporters were the biggest beneficiaries of this scheme. But Donald Trump scrapped it. And in response, India hit back. India imposed tariffs on 28 American imports, including goods like apples and walnuts. Some of the tariffs were as high as 70%. India still remains excluded from this trade scheme. This is despite bipartisan support for India in the US. Joe Biden, as president, could not deliver on this front, and now the decision falls to Donald Trump. He calls himself a deal maker. But every deal maker knows one thing: no negotiation can succeed with just demands and ultimatums. A successful deal requires compromise. It requires give and take. Without it, Trump will have a stalemate on his hands. Now let's look at the situation in Syria. But our focus today is on a foreign player in Syria, that's Russia. Russia was an ally of Bashar al-Assad, Syria's ousted dictator. Moscow helped Assad stay in power for years. They supported him with air power to help drive the rebels back. But now the Syrian rebels have won. And this puts Russia in an awkward situation. For many, Moscow is an enemy. That being said, Russia isn't a country to be trifled with. They have a strong military presence in Syria in the form of two bases. There's the Hmeimim Air Base near the city of Latakia. This is the base that Assad fled from. This is where he boarded his flight to Moscow. Russia also has a naval base in Syria in the city of Tartus. This is Russia's only naval base in the Mediterranean Sea. They built the Tartus base back in 1971, more than 50 years ago. The Himeyim base is newer. It was built in 2015. Now, both bases are an integral part of Russia's military strategy. They help Moscow project power overseas. They're used to resupply Russian forces abroad, like the mercenaries currently operating in Africa. So the Syrian bases are crucial for Moscow, but their future is uncertain. This is what the Kremlin said when asked about the bases.
There are no final decisions on this issue at the current moment. We have contacts with representatives of those in control of the situation in the country now, and everything will be settled through dialogue.
Russia says it is in talks with the new rulers of Syria. They're trying to work out a deal to keep the bases operational. But it's not a done deal yet. And they're working on a backup plan in case they're forced to abandon the Syrian bases. The Russians have started moving out some equipment. There are satellite images of the action. They show Antonov AN-124s being loaded. These are the world's largest cargo planes. They're being packed with Russian equipment and being flown back to Russia. These planes are also carrying diplomats from Russia and also from allied countries like Belarus and North Korea. But not all the cargo planes were headed home. Some of them took a different route. They landed up in the North African nation of Libya. 2 aircraft were spotted making trips to a Libyan airbase. These are the Ilyushin 76TD. These aircraft landed in the Al Khadim base near the city of Benghazi. These planes were presumably carrying Russian military equipment, which raises the question, is Russia relocating its military assets? Is it shifting base from Syria to Libya, and why Libya? Let's look at the situation in Libya first. It's a mess. This country has been in crisis for more than a decade, since 2011 in fact, when its leader and dictator Muammar Gaddafi was assassinated. Libya has been divided since then. It is currently controlled by 2 governments. One is based in the capital Tripoli. This is the government that is recognized by the United Nations. This is the first government. The second government is based in Benghazi. This one is backed by an armed group called the Libyan National Army. It is led by Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar. So Haftar is the power behind the Benghazi-based regime, and Moscow has been supporting him for years. In return, Haftar has allowed Russia to build up its military presence in Libya. As of today, Russia controls multiple bases in Libya, 4 air bases and 1 port. All of them are in areas controlled by Khalifa Haftar. It should answer the question, why Libya? But is it a viable option? Is it viable for Russia to move its forces to Libya? Can it really abandon the Syrian bases? In theory, it is possible. Libya's Tobruk port is still being built up. In time, it could rival Syria's Tartus. The Al Khadim air base near Benghazi may one day replace Himeyim. The other 3 air bases are almost a bonus. Remember, Russia has forces across Africa. It used Syria as a base to resupply them. It could now use Libya instead, which is actually located on the continent of Africa. So theoretically, it would make coordination simpler. A direct flight from Russia to Libya could speed things up. But there's a cost to all of this, and that cost is stability. You see, Libya is an unstable country. Yes, Syria was at war too, but the battle lines had been frozen for years, and the Russian bases were in areas firmly controlled by Assad. In Libya, it is different. It is more volatile. What happens if the UN-backed government overthrows its rivals? Or if the 2 governments decide to patch up? What happens to Russia's bases if a unity government asks them to leave? Libya's situation is fluid, so it is unwise for Russia to depend on this nation. Even if Libya lets them stay, this is not exactly a win. Russia already operates 5 bases there, along with the 2 in Syria. That's 7 military sites in total in the region. Even if Russia moves everything out of Syria, it still loses 2 bases. And then there's a location to consider. Syria is in West Asia. It allows Russia to exert its influence there in West Asia. It will be harder for them to do the same from Africa. And finally, there's the issue of Turkey. Direct flights from Russia to Libya will have to cross Turkish airspace. I'm talking about Russian military and cargo planes. They will be at the mercy of Turkish President Erdogan. With Syria, they could bypass Turkey, but they won't be able to do that with Libya. Long story short, Libya will be a poor substitute for Syria. If Russia wants to maintain its current level of influence, it should try to work out a deal with the Syrian rebels.
Every family it seems to be affected by a disappearance.
For 5 decades, the Assads ruled Syria with an iron fist. First, it was Hafiz al-Assad, then his son Bashar, who carried on the legacy. Now, both regimes were marked by fear and brutality. They crushed dissent using all sorts of techniques: imprisonment, torture, and mass executions. It's been 10 days since the Assad regime fell, and now Syria's mass graves are unearthing a haunting truth.
We've received more than 100 calls about mass graves. People believe that at every military site there are mass graves. The number of people who came out of the prisons is very low, and the number of missing is very large.
More than 150,000 people have vanished in Syria since 2011. They were either detained or arrested or forcibly disappeared. When Assad fled, desperate families rushed to find their loved ones. Their first hope was the prisons. Many prisoners were released, some families were reunited, but the numbers were underwhelming. So the families had to face an uncomfortable truth, that those missing might be dead. This kicked off a search for graves. Since last week, Syrians have discovered 4 major sites, 4 major mass grave sites, all located near the capital, Damascus. You can see them on the map here. The first is Najah. When the teams arrived here, they did not even have to dig. Bones were visible among mounds of earth. Tens of thousands are believed to have been buried here in Najah. It was all done in an organized manner. The bodies would come in freezer trucks accompanied by security vehicles. Once the bodies were unloaded, workers would dig up graves. 5 to 6 bodies would be put in one grave, and then they would put soil over it.
This is an area that we know to have been a mass grave site, where bodies of former detainees from Saydnaya, from elsewhere, had been brought in. When we arrived, we saw trenches that were dug in that hadn't been piled up yet. We saw in some areas human bones scattered that had looked quite old and bleached.
Then there's the city of Qutayfa. It's located around 45 kilometers from Damascus. The second mass grave site was discovered here. The whole place was full of trenches, around 20 feet deep, 10 feet wide, and almost 300 feet long. This site too operated in a similar fashion. From 2012 to 2018, 4 trucks came here twice a week. Each truck carried nearly 150 bodies. Assad's officers oversaw the burial process. Workers say they were forced to flatten bodies using bulldozers. This was done to make them easier to bury.
We've documented this crime occurred. We documented from satellite imagery and from witness testimony that the bodies were buried in trenches here at this particular cemetery. But to see it now, one, I think, gives us great reassurance and really corroborates what we know about the machinery of death that was maintained and operated by the Assad regime, certainly throughout the period of the uprising since 2011.
The sites were guarded by special police. No one could go near the sites. They could not even pass the area when the burials happened. Both these sites lay bare the horrifying scale of Assad's killing machine. The numbers are staggering. 60,000 tortured to death, 80,000 confirmed dead. And these are just estimates. The real toll is likely far higher. The Syrian civil war began in 2011. Nearly 500,000 people lost their lives. But the regime's atrocities began decades ago. The extrajudicial killings started under Assad's father. They continued during Bashar al-Assad's rule. These unmarked graves are proof. Experts say they haven't seen anything like this since the Nazis. The question is, what will they do next? The first priority is to secure the graves. Several teams are on the ground doing just that, securing the graves. This includes groups linked to the United Nations, Syria's White Helmets, and other humanitarian groups. They're all going through these graves, documenting everything that they see.
We are calling on international organizations and human rights organizations to come and open these graves so that we can find our children and determine whether they are dead. Where are they? Whose son is this and whose son is that? We don't know.
The second priority is identifying the bodies, and this is going to be a big challenge. Collecting DNA samples, doing forensic documentation, matching the remains with the families who waited for decades. Now Syrians have to process and document this horror. They will need help from global bodies. Their new rulers, the HTS, have promised justice. That's the rebel group that has captured power in Damascus. They are preserving the physical evidence. The HTS says those who committed these atrocities will be punished. But how and when remains unclear. So right now, Syria stands at a crossroads. It must confront the weight of its history, purge its anger and horror as it tries to build a new future. Our next story is from the United States. We are looking at the investment bankers on Wall Street. What comes to mind when you think about Wall Street? Some of you may associate it with glitz, glamour, and untold wealth. The rest of you may recall all the finance bro memes highlighting the cringe-worthy investment bankers who love nothing more than to flaunt their wealth. Now, both these depictions may hold some truth, but there's also more to it. There's a secret to their wealth and success, and that secret is overwork fueled by prescription drugs. And this is leading to all kinds of problems, heart problems, addiction, even death. Here's our report.
We aren't asking you to sympathize with finance bros. That isn't what this story is about. Instead, we take a look at the system, the environment that gives birth to successful Wall Street bankers, and how it treats the people who don't make the cut. Some new reports have come out, and they highlight a growing problem on Wall Street: the rise of an ADHD drug epidemic. Most Wall Street bankers in the 80s and 90s were depicted as cocaine addicts in movies. The film The Wolf of Wall Street really drives that point home. But today's wolf cubs are turning to other stimulants, ones that happen to be legal, like the ADHD medication Adderall. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Simply put, people who suffer from it can't pay attention to things because they're hyperactive and therefore easily distracted. That's the crux of the disorder. So ADHD medication helps patients focus. But what happens when people without ADHD take the medication? People who already have regular attention spans. What happens when they take pills to improve their focus? Well, apparently, it makes mundane office work interesting. This is reportedly the new secret to success on Wall Street. Wall Street bankers are infamous for their lavish lifestyles. But behind all that wealth lies a world of mind-numbing paperwork. 100-slide PowerPoint presentations that have to be churned out daily. But behind all that wealth lies a world of mind-numbing paperwork. 100-slide PowerPoint presentations that have to be churned out daily. Then you have endless rows on Excel, tracking minuscule details from unheard-of companies. Those who work regularly with PowerPoint or Excel know how daunting this is. Can you imagine doing that for 20 hours a day, and sometimes 7 days a week? Churning out PPTs and financial models day in and day out, whether from the office or from home. That's the life of a typical entry-level Wall Street banker. But many people are determined to do this because it means a starting salary of $200,000 a year and all the prestige that comes with being a Wall Street banker. To get through the grind, newly minted investment bankers start taking ADHD medication, probably so that they can stay awake and make their joyless PPTs. Soon, the ADHD medication becomes an addiction. The bankers keep increasing their dosage. Smaller quantities don't cut it anymore. Meanwhile, their companies keep increasing their workloads. Calls at 4 a.m., then a client meeting at 9, a fresh PPT by lunch, and then training newbies into the night. Wall Street is a profit-churning machine. To benefit from it, you have to keep fueling the engine, and that fuel is your health and well-being. Despite the cost, Wall Street bankers keep doing this. They take ADHD medication to achieve inhuman levels of focus. Many turn to nicotine pouches, others to even harder drugs. Many of their bodies can't take it. You keep hearing reports like this. 35-year-olds dying of heart problems because of overwork, because their hearts just couldn't take the unreasonable medication-fueled productivity. This is the dark side of Wall Street. This is what's hidden behind all that glitz and glamour. Some people might still be tempted by this finance bro life, but hopefully there are some who will ask if it's really worth it.
India is planning to reopen an old diplomatic post. It's isolated, it's dangerous, and it's steeped in Cold War history. I'm talking about North Korea. It may come as a surprise to a lot of you, but India does have an embassy in Pyongyang. Until 2021, we also had an ambassador there. But in July that year, the mission was shut down. All the diplomats were recalled to India. The reason? None given. New Delhi rarely comments on its activities in North Korea, but since this was 2021, maybe the pandemic was the reason. Either way, 3 years have passed and now India wants to reopen the embassy. Reports say a technical team has reached Pyongyang. Their first priority is security checks to sweep the embassy for bugs or snooping devices. And North Korea is notorious for this. They've always been suspicious of foreigners, so India is being extra careful. The next step is sending diplomats. Reports say the government is reaching out to some Western partners like Germany, the UK and Poland. These countries have already sent teams to Pyongyang, so their experience could be valuable. After all, this is a complicated diplomatic posting. You think Indian bureaucracy is slow? Well, look at North Korea. They take ages to make foreign policy decisions like okaying ambassadors. So expect a rocky road ahead. But the bigger question is, why is India reopening this embassy? What is New Delhi hoping to achieve? Well, there are 3 factors to note here. Number 1, India and North Korea are not strangers. They have a history of engagement. In the 1950s, India mediated during the Korean War. New Delhi managed the repatriation of prisoners after the fighting, so there is goodwill on both sides in North and South Korea. After the war, the engagements continued. In the 1970s, Pyongyang joined the Non-Aligned Movement. It's a group that India co-founded, the Non-Aligned Movement. And after the 1980s, some high-profile visits happened. North Korea's Vice President and Premier visited India. So did top officials of their Communist Party. They came to India. From India, the Vice President visited Pyongyang in 1992. And the last major trip was in 2018. That's when India's Minister of State for External Affairs, General V.K. Singh, traveled to Pyongyang. You see, this is a relationship rooted in the Cold War. The West did not like North Korea. They also did not like India. So New Delhi and Pyongyang decided to collaborate, and one area they worked on was culture. North Korea hosts a film festival every 2 years. Indian films are among the few that make it. So bilateral exchanges are not new or surprising. That's one factor. Factor number 2 is Putin and Trump. In his first term, Donald Trump met Kim Jong-un thrice. He had 3 meetings. He tried to get Kim to abandon his nukes. Now, the talks did not produce anything significant, but the goals align with India's. New Delhi, too, wants a denuclearized Korean peninsula. So if Trump resumes the dialogue, India should not be caught off guard. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has dragged Kim into his war in Ukraine. Reports say thousands of North Korean soldiers are fighting in Ukraine. Apparently, hundreds are already dead in the fighting. Despite that, the Putin-Kim relationship is expected to grow. Again, India will want to be ready for that. Which brings us to the third and final factor, to keep Pakistan in check. Islamabad and Pyongyang also have a long history. Pakistani scientists sold nuclear know-how to North Korea. They basically helped Pyongyang build a nuclear bomb. In return, Pakistan got missile technology. Even today, the nexus is alive. In 2022, India flagged this issue at the United Nations. Listen to this.
We would also like to reiterate once again the importance of addressing the proliferation of nuclear and missile technologies related to the DPRK. Proliferation of nuclear and missile technologies is a matter of concern as they have an adverse impact on peace and security in the region, including in India.
So India has good reasons to reopen that embassy to keep up its contacts in Pyongyang. But this news also got us thinking. How many embassies are there in North Korea? And how many foreign diplomats? We don't have official numbers from the regime, but reports say there are 24 diplomatic missions in North Korea. Most of them are located inside a special compound in Pyongyang. Only 3 embassies are located outside this compound. These are the embassies of China, Russia, and Pakistan. The US does not have a mission in North Korea, but a handful of European nations do, like Germany, Poland, Romania, the UK, and Sweden. Most of them shut their operations during the pandemic, but this year some have reopened them. We're not talking about full-fledged missions, though. Most of them are run by a basic team, and their life can be quite interesting. Diplomats are closely watched and policed. Some of them also have a government minder, someone who accompanies them on certain occasions. They're free to travel within Pyongyang, but to travel outside, you need permission. And what about interactions? Again, very difficult. North Korea keeps locals and foreigners segregated, so diplomats cannot mingle with Koreans. It's definitely a challenging posting. We haven't heard of any attacks or dangers to diplomats, but in the future, who knows? This is a regime known for suspicion, paranoia, and ruthlessness. It's not an ideal host for any diplomat. Now on to the Democratic Republic of Congo. It has accused Apple, the tech giant Apple, of using conflict minerals. What's that? What is a conflict mineral? These are natural resources extracted in regions plagued by armed conflict. The most common are the 3 Tg minerals: tungsten, tin, and tantalum. They're commonly used to make phones. But some of the mines are run by armed groups. They kill civilians, they rape women, and they use forced labor. Now, DRC's lawyers argue that Apple uses minerals pillaged from DR Congo. These then enter the international supply chains. So DRC says the company is complicit in those crimes. Apple, of course, has denied all these allegations. Our next report tells you more.
In this digital age, our phones keep us connected. But beneath the sleek exteriors of these devices lies a harrowing truth. A tale of exploitation, violence, and environmental destruction tied to the minerals that power them. At the center of this is the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Apple. You see, the DRC is rich in natural resources. Deep beneath its soil lie minerals essential for modern technology. Tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold, collectively known as the 3 Tg minerals. These minerals are extracted in regions plagued by armed conflict. The profits often finance militias and fuel violence. It's a cycle of exploitation that devastates communities and perpetuates instability. Now, in a bold legal move, the Congolese government has filed criminal complaints in France and Belgium. These complaints are against subsidiaries of the tech giant Apple. The allegations? That Apple's supply chain is tainted with blood minerals sourced from conflict zones. The company has denied the accusations, emphasizing its commitment to responsible sourcing. Apple says it holds its suppliers to the highest standards, requiring rigorous audits and certifications. The authorities in France and Belgium will consider whether there is sufficient evidence. This is to see if they can take the case forward. But this isn't the first such allegation. For years, rights groups have claimed that the global supply chain for these minerals is anything but clean. The true cost of these minerals goes beyond financial profits. It's measured in lives lost, futures stolen, and environments destroyed. Forced child labor and unsafe working conditions are widespread in the DRC's mines. Many are controlled by the country's armed groups. Meanwhile, unregulated mining practices have left scars on the region's lush landscapes. Large quantities of conflict minerals are transported from the DRC to Rwanda. They are then laundered into the international supply chains. However, Rwanda has denied any involvement. The Rwandan government has dismissed the Congolese government's legal action. It has called it a media stunt. The issue has been raised before in international forums, and in response to mounting pressure, several initiatives were taken, like the Dodd-Frank Act in the US and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development guidelines. They aim to ensure the responsible sourcing of minerals. Companies like Apple claim to follow these standards rigorously, but critics argue that such measures are often reactive and insufficient. Independent audits and certifications can be difficult to enforce in these regions, especially as conflict makes transparency nearly impossible. And so the question remains, will the DRC's fight for justice spark real change? By taking legal action against global corporations, the country is sending a clear message. Its resources are not just for the world to exploit. The future of fair and ethical supply chains rests on what happens next.
It's another day in Bangladesh 2.0, where minorities get targeted, but terrorists and smugglers get a free pass. Let me take you back to 2004. Bangladeshi authorities seized a massive weapons cache. Almost 10 trucks full of arms, 10 trucks, around 27,000 grenades, 150 rocket launchers, 11 lakh ammunition rounds, and more than 1,000 submachine guns. All of this was caught in Chattogram. It remains the biggest arms haul in Bangladesh's history. Do you know where it was heading? To India's northeast, to an armed group called ULFA, the United Liberation Front of Assam. It's been declared a terror group by the Indian government. Its goal is to create an independent Assam to break it away from India. In 2004, ULFA was led by a man called Paresh Barua. It is believed that he got help from Bangladesh's government. There was a coalition government in Dhaka then, led by the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Now, this case dragged on for many years. In 2016, Barua and 13 others got the death penalty. This list of those who got the death penalty included Junior Home Minister of the BNP. He too was given the death penalty. But today, those sentences were reduced. Barua's death penalty has been turned into life imprisonment, and the junior minister has been acquitted. No jail, no punishment, nothing. Now, this tells you a couple of things. One, how Bangladesh's judiciary has been hijacked. And two, how anti-India elements are being encouraged. Now, to be fair, the judiciary was biased under Sheikh Hasina too. But Mohammed Yunus promised to fix that. Instead, he has flipped it. BNP leaders are getting acquitted in corruption cases, terror suspects are walking out on bail, and anti-India militants are getting reduced sentences. This is also a case of bias. Yunus is carrying out a mini purge on the judiciary. In October, 12 High Court judges were barred from their bench. Do you know why? Because the students protested against them. It tells you how the regime is gaming the system. Now we come to the second point, the anti-India push. In 2004, ULFA leader Paresh Barua was living in Bangladesh. He was protected by the BNP regime. In fact, most of these separatists were based there. Separatists active in Tripura, in Nagaland, in Mizoram, in Manipur. The Indian security agencies were flushing them out, so they shifted base to Dhaka. And this has happened twice in Bangladesh's recent history. The first time it happened was from 1991 to 1996, and then again from 2001 to 2006. Do you know what is common in these years? Both times, Bangladesh was ruled by the BNP. And this setup played into the hands of Pakistan. Their deep state could easily funnel weapons to India's northeast. When Sheikh Hasina took charge in 2009, she dismantled this nexus. Even Ulfa's Paresh Barua had to flee. Right now, he's believed to be in China. Now, you can see why this is a big concern for India. India's northeast shares a long border with Bangladesh. It's almost 1,800 kilometers long. So what if Dhaka starts protecting separatists again? What if they funnel weapons and funds into India? It could reignite the frozen conflicts. Assam's chief minister flagged this concern in August. He said Bangladesh should not return to the old ways. But UNICEF's ministers do not inspire confidence. Let me introduce Mehfooz Alam. He is an advisor in Mohammad Yunus's regime. On Monday, he posted an alarming message. He accused India, and I'm quoting, he accused India of colonizing the Northeast. He also called for a repeat of 1975 and 2024. 1975 is when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was assassinated. 2024 is when Sheikh Hasina was toppled. He wants a repeat of that in India's northeast. Such statements are a concern for New Delhi. They reveal the thought process of the new regime in Dhaka. We've already lost an ally in Dhaka. Let's hope we don't add an enemy. The festive season is here. Are you making big plans? A concert here, a vacation there? If yes, watch out before you make that booking, because hidden fees might be lurking around the corner. I'm talking about the additional charges that creep up at checkout and inflate the final price of your booking. This is what regulators call junk fees. Every year, Americans collectively pay $90 billion of it. Others in the world pay junk fees as well. But in the US, there's finally some action. They've come out with a new rule. They have banned junk fees. But how will it work? How will it help the consumers? And what does the junk fees economy look like in other countries? Here is a report.
Many of us are planning vacations, buying concert tickets, and making extensive plans for Christmas and New Year's. We don't want to be a killjoy, but beware of those seemingly cheap plane tickets or hotel room advertisements. They could be decked up online traps to make you spend more money than you anticipated. Companies are increasingly nickel and diming consumers with hidden charges, or what regulators call junk fees. Basically, the extra charges that are not typically disclosed up front when you look up booking prices, like additional fees for seat selection, checked-in luggage, or resort amenities. But when you reach the end of the transaction, the junk fees have crept in and inflated the price of your booking. This is an obscure and often painful last-minute addition. But if you're in the United States, there's good news. Their government has banned junk fees. The Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, has announced a new rule banning hotels and ticketing and short-term rental companies from including hidden junk fees in their total price. If the companies don't comply, they will be hit with financial penalties. The details are not clear yet. But how does this rule work? It says no more convenience or service fees at checkout. Pricing information will now have to be presented before consumers agree to pay. This rule doesn't limit what sellers can charge. Instead, it boosts transparency. It requires businesses to display the total price along with additional fees prominently. Why? Just listen to what the FTC says.
People deserve to know upfront what they're being asked to pay, without worrying that they'll later be saddled with mysterious fees that they haven't budgeted for and can't avoid.
And it will save Americans billions of dollars, at least $90 billion to be specific. Americans collectively spend $90 billion every year on junk fees. This insidious business has created an entire junk fee economy. It undermines competition, helping few players come out on top by making it impractical for consumers to compare prices. American consumers spend about 53 million hours per year in just searching for the total price of live event tickets and hotel rooms, trying to compare prices across sites with difficulty, and watching their bargain crumble with every click until they're met with a shock at checkout. And this isn't just a US problem. Junk fees haunt customers the world over. In the UK, it costs consumers more than $2.7 billion every year, and in Europe, more than $31 billion. So the problem with hidden fees is not so hidden, and the US has finally cracked down. Though if you're making plans already, remember, the new rule is set to take effect from 120 days later. Until then, this festive season, stay strong and make sure that the price is right for you.
Two astronauts, one space station, and no end in sight. I'm talking about NASA astronauts Sunitha Williams and Butch Wilmore. They've been stranded in space, stuck up there for more than 6 months now, and their homecoming has just been delayed again. Backstory first, Williams and Wilmore blasted off on the 5th of June on Boeing's Starliner capsule. This is a new spacecraft. The aerospace company built it for NASA, so NASA astronauts were tasked with testing the capsule. That was the mission, to test it. And this mission was supposed to last 8 days. But it grew to 8 months. After rocketing into orbit, the Starliner ran into problems. It had helium leaks, and its thrusters malfunctioned. The capsule successfully delivered the test pilots to the International Space Station, but it could not bring them home. So NASA decided to extend the mission. In September, they brought back the Starliner empty. The astronauts were left in space for longer. Enter the Dragon spacecraft. It is a brand new capsule by Elon Musk's SpaceX. Now, this is the spacecraft that is going to launch the next NASA mission. A crew of 4 astronauts will go up in February 2025. It will have 2 free seats on the return trip. So NASA decided those seats, those 2 empty seats, will be taken by Williams and Wilmore, kind of like a post-party carpool to drop your friends home. At least that was the plan. The ticket home for the stranded astronauts. But the problems were far from over. The Dragon, the new spacecraft, is not ready to take its flight. SpaceX needs more time, so Williams and Wilmore just got their space mission extended again. NASA says they won't be back until spring, until the end of March or April. Basically, they will be stuck in space for at least 10 months. So here on Earth, there is public outrage. Boeing is facing the music. They have lost more than $1 billion. They're thinking about selling their space business. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden is cracking jokes, saying, and I'm quoting, saying that he may need to go to space to save the astronauts. 82-year-old Biden, who should focus on bringing his people back, is in his George Clooney era. Meanwhile, NASA is in its Delulu era. All year, they have insisted that the astronauts are not stuck or stranded. Well, let's see. Imagine going on an 8-day work trip, not to Paris or London, but to outer space, and not being able to leave for 10 months. Most people would consider that stranded. And you know how they're justifying this recent delay? With standard PR lingo. They say, and I'm quoting, "This is a painstaking endeavor that requires great attention to detail." Did they get ChatGPT to write this? That's their reason for another delay, painstaking endeavor, which is difficult news for Williams and Wilmore. Yes, they're both Navy. Yes, they're highly trained astronauts. Yes, they have extensively rehearsed everything that can go wrong. They know the risks involved, but they're also human, and this ordeal cannot be easy. Space is hard on the body. It is one of the most prohibitive environments. Living in zero gravity means piercing headaches, space sickness, which is like motion sickness on steroids, digestive issues, genetic changes, vision deterioration, and loss of bone density. You can see the physical toll on Williams and Wilmore, so much so that they had to address public concerns. They had to give reassuring statements. But what we may not be able to see is also the mental toll, because space is hard on the mind as well. The monotony of living inside hallways no more than 6 feet wide, with walls of computers and cables, being confined for months on end. But despite the difficulties with their hair floating upwards, they have both reiterated that they feel grateful for more time in space, and they do not blame the circumstances. While we can only hope for their safe and speedy return, here's something to consider. The next time we get angry over a cancelled train or a flight delay, let's spare a thought for these NASA astronauts, who at least on the outside are looking at the silver lining from up in space. Donald J. Trump, you can love him, you can hate him, but one thing is for sure, you cannot ignore him. He's back like a comeback tour that never really ended. Donald Trump's inauguration is still a month away. He's not even in the White House, but the US president-elect is already making headlines with his appearances, banter, and meetings with leaders. More so, it is leaving the internet in splits. After all, he's the only guy who can turn a simple press conference into a reality TV show. See for yourselves.
It is an honor, and this is a double, because usually they don't coordinate the Man of the Year or the Person of the Year with the ringing of the bell. And brilliantly, you picked them both at the same time, and you were all friends, and you said, let's do it. And it takes one trip. It doesn't take 2 trips. That's okay. We like to save. We like to be able to do it properly. We'll take a look at TikTok. You know, I have a warm spot in my heart for TikTok because I won youth by 34 points. And there are those that say that TikTok had something to do with that. Now, Joe Rogan did, and some of the other people that were recommended by my son Barron, he knew names. I said, who is that? Tell me, who's that? Dad, you gotta be kidding. I can't believe you don't know. And I did those interviews, and it was actually sort of cute, if you want to know the truth, but we did them. And that had an impact. Good man, this one. And it's an honor to be here. We had a good time together, and we had a lot of success, really great success working together on defense and offense too. And it certainly seems like the world is going a little crazy right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Masa of SoftBank from Japan, and he's just agreed to invest $50 billion in the United States and 50,000 jobs.
I'm excited to go, and we were discussing, and President Trump said, Masa, double down is not enough. Maybe, go for more, right?
That's what I'm going to ask him right now. Would you make it $200 billion instead of that? He can actually, believe it or not, he can actually afford to do that. Would you do that?
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Japan's Space One terminates the flight of its Kairos rocket shortly after liftoff. The first domestic Syrian flight since the fall of the Assad regime lands in Aleppo. And Santa Claus swaps his sleigh for a jet ski to deliver presents in Brazil. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1865, America formally outlawed the practice of slavery. The move followed an years-long civil war in the country. It took 246 years for the US to ban this inhumane practice. Leaving you on that note, thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Helena e Samuel Henrique. Sorriso aí, meu filho. Aí, cara. Ah, fotinho, fotinho.